The sky had turned an ominous shade of gray, thick clouds rolling in from the horizon, and the first flashes of lightning danced across the ocean. The beach was emptying quickly as vacationers gathered their towels, umbrellas, and children, all hurrying back to the safety of their hotel rooms. I decided to head in as well, leaving behind the beach bar and the half-finished beer that had long since gone warm. It was supposed to be a relaxing tropical getaway, a week in paradise where Vika and I could rekindle our connection. Lately, things between us had felt strained. I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was, but there was an unsettling distance, an unspoken tension that lingered between us like a storm ready to break. As I pushed open the door to our room, the dim light of the sunset peeked through the drawn curtains, casting a soft glow on the inside. Vika wasn't there. She had gone for a walk, she'd said, something about clearing her mind. I dropped my keys on the dresser, my mind on nothing more than a quick shower before dinner when I noticed her phone on the small table by the window. The screen lit up with a message just as I looked at it. "Raul, can't wait to see you tonight." My heart sank. Raul. I didn't know anyone named Raul. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind, each one more painful than the last. My fingers moved before my mind had the chance to stop them, swiping up and unlocking her phone. The conversation was there, clear as day. There were no misunderstandings to be had, no explanations that could make it right. The flirtatious exchanges, the promises, the plans. My wife, Vika, had found her thrills in the arms of a bartender while I had been none the wiser. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. They all hit me at once, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. I closed my eyes, trying to regain some sense of composure, trying to think past the red haze that threatened to overwhelm me. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I did none of those things. Instead, I put her phone back exactly where I found it, making sure everything looked untouched. My heart pounded in my chest, the echo of it almost deafening. When Vika returned, she looked at me and smiled, oblivious to what I had just discovered. I smiled back, even though everything inside me screamed not to. I couldn't let her know, not yet. I needed time to think, to plan. That night, as I lay beside her, the sound of waves crashing against the shore barely audible through the thick hotel walls, I began to formulate a plan. I wasn't going to confront her, not in private, not like this. No, this deserved something more fitting. Did she want to keep secrets and play games? I would give her an ending she'd never forget. The next morning, the sun was shining as if nothing had happened. As if my entire world hadn't shifted the night before. Vika woke up beside me, yawning and stretching, her eyes bright and her smile easy. She kissed me on the cheek and asked what I wanted to do that day. I smiled back, my own mask of calm firmly in place, and suggested we relax by the pool. After all, we were on vacation, weren't we? By midday, the pool area was bustling with people. Children splashed in the shallow end, couples lounged on sunbeds, and bartenders hurried back and forth with colorful drinks. Vika had settled into a sun chair with a book, her sunglasses shielding her eyes, while I made my way to the bar. I scanned the area until I spotted him, Raul, the man from the messages. He was exactly what I'd imagined, tanned skin, a charming smile, the kind of confidence that came from knowing he had no shortage of admirers. He was serving drinks with practiced ease, chatting up the guests as if he knew each of them personally. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to keep my emotions in check. I had to be careful. I couldn't let my anger show, not yet. As I approached the bar, Raul looked up, his eyes meeting mine. He gave me the same friendly smile he gave to everyone else, no recognition of who I was, or who I might be to him. "Hey there, what can I get for you?" he asked, leaning casually against the counter. "Something strong," I said, giving him a friendly grin. "I'm Rick, by the way. My wife and I are here for the week." "Nice to meet you, Rick. I'm Raul," he replied, handing me a bright blue drink that looked as much like a vacation as it tasted. "You picked the perfect week for it. Great weather, lots of activities, should be fun." I nodded, trying not to think too much about how much more Raul knew about my wife's activities than I did. Instead, I leaned on the bar, feigning casual interest. "You must know all the good spots around here, right? We're looking for something special to do. Maybe something a bit more private?" Raul's eyes lit up, and I could see that this was a request he was used to. He started giving me suggestions, places on the beach where the sunset was especially beautiful, a hidden bar off the beaten path, and even a little-known hike that offered a stunning view. I listened, nodding along, but all I could think about was how he might have used those same spots to impress Vika. The thought twisted my stomach, but I pushed it down. As we chatted, I made sure to drop hints about the pool party I was organizing. I wanted Raul to know about it. I wanted him to be there. The idea was growing in my mind, taking shape. This wasn't just about confronting Vika anymore. I wanted both of them to understand what they'd done, to see the consequences of their actions played out in front of everyone. Actually, my wife and I are throwing a pool party in a couple of days, I said. Keeping my tone light. You should come by. It's going to be a lot of fun, drinks, music, the whole deal. Raul looked genuinely interested, and why wouldn't he be? To him, I was just another tourist, a friendly stranger with no idea about what was happening behind his back. Sounds great, man. I'll definitely try to make it. I smiled, raising my glass to him. Great. I'll see you then. Walking back to where Vika sat, I felt the weight of the plan settling on my shoulders. She looked up at me. Her smile still the same, her eyes still filled with the warmth that had once been my everything. I wondered if she noticed the difference in my expression and if she could sense the darkness lurking just beneath my calm facade. But if she did, she didn't say anything. She just reached out, took my hand, and pulled me down onto the sun chair next to her. For the rest of the afternoon, I played the part of the loving husband, laughing, joking, holding her close as we swam in the clear, cool water. All the while, the plan took root, growing stronger and more vivid in my mind. I would give her a chance to see what she'd done to us, to see the cracks she'd created in our once perfect life. And I would make sure Raul was right there beside her when it all came crashing down. The days leading up to the party were a strange, almost surreal blend of excitement and dread. I threw myself into the preparations, making sure every detail was perfect. I wanted this event to be unforgettable. And not just for the guests who would enjoy the music, drinks, and carefree atmosphere. I wanted it to be unforgettable for Vika and Raul as well. I spoke to the hotel manager about renting the pool area for the evening. I spun a story about celebrating our anniversary, emphasizing how much I wanted this to be a special event for my wife. He agreed with a smile, and soon enough, the arrangements were made. The decorations were chosen, bright lights, tropical flowers, everything to make it look like a real celebration. I even hired a local band to provide live music, ensuring the night would have the perfect rhythm for everything I had planned. Vika seemed genuinely touched by the effort I was putting in. She even made a few suggestions about the theme and the decorations, laughing as she showed me ideas on her phone. I played along, smiling, nodding, pretending to be the doting husband who just wanted to make his wife happy. Every time she looked at me with that sparkle in her eyes, I had to fight to keep my expression steady. The duality of it all, the closeness she thought we shared and the truth I knew, felt almost unbearable. On the day of the party, Vika seemed to be in her element. She spent the afternoon getting ready, picking out a dress that hugged her figure perfectly, her excitement palpable. She looked beautiful, and a part of me, a part that I wanted to ignore, hated how much I still loved her at that moment. But I couldn't afford to let my feelings soften me. I had come too far to turn back now. As the evening approached, I watched the hotel staff set up around the pool. Lanterns were hung on strings above the water, their light shimmering as the sun began to set. Tables were arranged with snacks and colorful drinks, and the band started warming up, their instruments echoing across the courtyard. Guests were arriving, most of them people we had met during our stay, fellow vacationers looking forward to a good time. The atmosphere was lively, filled with laughter and the chatter of people enjoying their holiday. I spotted Raul across the courtyard, making his way toward the bar. He looked relaxed, smiling and greeting a few guests he seemed to recognize. He caught sight of me and waved, and I waved back, my smile as genuine as I could make it. The band struck up a tune, and Vika appeared at my side, slipping her arm around mine. She was radiant, her eyes sparkling as she looked up at me. "You did all this for us?" she asked, her voice soft, almost disbelieving. I nodded, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "Of course, you deserve it." She smiled, her gaze lingering on mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw something, an understanding, perhaps, or maybe guilt. But it passed, and she pulled me toward the dance floor, her laughter bright as she led me into the center of the crowd. The party was in full swing now, and everything was falling into place. I watched as Vika laughed with friends, as Raul mingled among the guests, his eyes occasionally drifting toward her. I could see the glances they exchanged, the silent acknowledgement between them. It made my skin crawl, but I kept my composure, reminding myself of the endgame. After a while, I made my way to the bar, ordering a drink and nodding toward Raul, who had taken over serving. He handed me a cocktail, oblivious to the fact that I knew everything about him and my wife. I chatted with him briefly, even joked a little, making sure he had no reason to suspect anything was amiss. I invited him to join us later, to have a drink and enjoy the party once his shift ended. "Sure thing, Rick," Raul said, his smile genuine. "I'll be there." I returned to Vika, handing her a drink, and we danced together, the music loud and joyful. The pool shimmered under the lanterns, the guests clapped along with the beat, and everything seemed to be just another perfect vacation moment. But then, as the band took a break and the crowd settled, I walked up to the microphone we'd set up for announcements. I tapped it a few times, drawing everyone's attention. Vika looked up, curious, her smile still in place, while Raul stood by the bar, a drink in hand, watching me. "Hey, everyone, thanks so much for coming tonight," I began, my voice steady, even as my heart pounded in my chest. "I just wanted to say a few words about what this night means to me." I caught Vika's eye, her smile fading slightly as she sensed the change in my tone. I looked at her, then at Raul, and then back at the crowd. The moment had arrived, the truth was about to come out, and there was no turning back. "I planned this party to celebrate something special," I continued, my voice unwavering. "To celebrate honesty, trust, and the bonds that hold us together. But sometimes those bonds break, and we have to face the truth, no matter how much it hurts." The crowd had gone quiet, all eyes on me. Vika's face had lost all its color, and Raul shifted uncomfortably, confusion crossing his features. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the printed messages, proof of their betrayal. I held them up, my eyes never leaving Vika's. "This," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper, "is the truth that I've been carrying with me." Gasps echoed across the pool area. Vika's eyes widened, her face a mask of shock and disbelief, while Raul's expression shifted from confusion to realization. The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of my words settling over the gathering like a storm cloud. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The printed messages in my hand fluttered slightly in the evening breeze. And I could see Vika's face pale, her eyes wide with shock and something that looked like fear. Raul, on the other hand, looked as if he had been slapped, his confident posture crumbling as realization set in. The silence was heavy. People glanced at each other, unsure if this was some kind of twisted joke or a cruel prank. I could hear murmurs start up, whispers moving through the crowd like a wave. Vika took a hesitant step toward me, her hand half raised as if she wanted to reach out. "Rick," she whispered, her voice trembling. But I wasn't interested in anything she had to say. I turned to the crowd, my face a mask of calm. "I'm sorry, everyone, for ruining the evening," I said, my voice carrying across the now still pool. "But I think it's time the truth came out. Vika and Raul have been seeing each other behind my back. And tonight, I wanted them both to see what it feels like when everything they've hidden is exposed." I could see the looks on the faces around me, shock, disbelief, even pity. People were staring at Vika, then at Raul, their expressions shifting from confusion to judgment. Vika's eyes filled with tears, and she opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Raul started moving toward me, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. "Rick, man, let's talk about this," he began, but I wasn't interested in any explanations. I turned and walked away, leaving the microphone behind, the printed messages scattering across the pool deck like fallen leaves. I could hear Vika calling after me, her voice shaky, desperate. But I didn't turn back. I made my way through the stunned crowd, ignoring the glances, the whispers, the concerned looks from strangers who had no idea what to say. I felt numb, as if everything around me had lost its meaning. Back in the hotel room, I locked the door behind me and sat down on the edge of the bed. The room was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just left behind. I felt the adrenaline leaving my body, replaced by an empty heaviness that seemed to weigh down my very soul. I had imagined this moment so many times, thinking it would bring me some sort of closure or satisfaction. I had pictured Vika's face, Raul's reaction, and the stunned silence of the crowd. But now that it had happened, I felt none of the triumph I had hoped for. Instead, all I felt was an overwhelming sense of loss. Vika had betrayed me, and I had taken my revenge. But as I sat there, alone in the dim hotel room, I realized that I had lost something far greater than just my wife. I had lost the life we had built together, the dreams we had shared, the future I thought we were going to have. And no amount of revenge could ever bring that back. The door to our room rattled, followed by the sound of Vika's voice, muffled through the thick wood. She was crying, pleading for me to open up. Her words were a blur, apologies and explanations tumbling out in a desperate mess, but I remained seated, my eyes fixed on the floor. I couldn't bear to face her, not now. Eventually, her knocking stopped, replaced by a long silence. I heard her footsteps move away, fading down the hallway, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I felt drained, like every ounce of energy had been sapped from my body. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything that had happened. The image of Vika's face when I revealed the messages kept flashing in my mind, her eyes wide, her expression a mix of shock and pain. Part of me had wanted to see her hurt, to make her feel even a fraction of the betrayal I had felt. But seeing her like that hadn't brought me the satisfaction I thought it would. Instead, it left a hollow ache in my chest, a sense that I had become someone I barely recognized. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. I could hear the muffled sounds of the resort outside, children laughing, people chatting, the occasional splash of water. Life was continuing, just as it always did, oblivious to the storm that had torn through my world the night before. I got up and opened the curtains, squinting at the bright morning light. The pool area was empty, the decorations from the party already taken down, as if none of it had ever happened. I turned away, grabbed my suitcase, and began to pack. I couldn't stay here, not after everything that had happened. I needed to leave, to get away from this place and everything it now represented. As I packed, there was a soft knock on the door. I hesitated, then opened it to find Vika standing there, her eyes red from crying. She looked at me, her gaze filled with a kind of broken hope, as if she thought there might still be a chance to fix things. "Rick," she began, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Please, can we talk?" I stared at her for a long moment, taking in her disheveled appearance, and the way her shoulders slumped as if she was carrying the weight of the world. I wanted to feel anger, to hold on to the fury that had driven me to this point, but all I felt was exhaustion. "There's nothing left to say, Vika," I replied, my voice flat. "You made your choice, and now I've made mine." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she nodded, as if she had expected this. She stepped back, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I'm so sorry, Rick. I never meant for any of this to happen." I closed my eyes, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. "I know you didn't, but it did." I shut the door gently, the sound of it clicking into place echoing in the quiet room. I finished packing, my movements slow, deliberate. When I finally left the room, I didn't look back. I made my way through the resort, past the pool where everything had come undone, past the bar where Raoul had stood, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit him. I checked out at the front desk, the clerk giving me a polite smile, unaware of the chaos that had played out under their roof. I walked out into the bright sunlight, the weight of the suitcase heavy in my hand, but nowhere near as heavy as the burden I carried in my heart. As I got into the cab that would take me to the airport, I looked out at the resort one last time. I thought about the life I had left behind, the dreams that had been shattered, and the future that now lay uncertain before me. As the car pulled away, I realized that, for the first time since I had discovered Vika's betrayal, I felt a strange, fragile sense of relief. The storm had passed, and now, all that was left was to find a way to rebuild. The flight home was quiet, the kind of silence that feels like both a relief and a burden. The hum of the plane's engines drowned out my thoughts, and I found myself staring out the window, watching the clouds drift by, trying to make sense of what my life had become. Everything felt surreal, almost like it had happened to someone else. The betrayal, the confrontation, the cold truth that had torn my life apart. It was all behind me now, and yet it lingered, heavy as a shadow. When I arrived back home, the first thing I noticed was how empty it felt. Our apartment, once filled with laughter, warmth, and the routines of everyday life, now seemed hollow. The silence was deafening, reminding me of everything that was missing. Vika's presence had been a constant part of this place, and without her, it felt like a shell of what it used to be. I dropped my suitcase by the door, not bothering to unpack it. Instead, I moved to the living room, standing there for a long moment as I took it all in. Photos of us were scattered across the walls and shelves, smiling, happy, snapshots of a life I had thought was perfect. I walked over to one of them, my fingers brushing against the frame. It was a picture of us at a friend's wedding, Vika in a light blue dress, her arm around me, both of us laughing. I took the photo down, staring at it for a moment before setting it face down on the table. One by one, I removed the other pictures, placing them in a drawer, out of sight but not out of mind. There were too many memories here, too much that reminded me of what had been lost. I needed a fresh start, a chance to move on from the wreckage that had been my marriage. The days passed slowly. I threw myself into work, trying to fill the empty hours with something, anything, to keep my mind from drifting back to Vika and Raul. It wasn't easy. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders, places we used to go together, restaurants we loved, songs that played on the radio that brought her back to me. But I refused to let myself dwell on it. I had made my choice, and I needed to live with it. I started running in the mornings, pushing myself harder than I had in years. The physical exhaustion was a welcome distraction, the burn in my muscles drowning out the ache in my heart. I focused on each step, each breath, letting the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement clear my mind. It was during those runs that I began to feel like I might actually be able to find a way forward, one small step at a time. One day, after a long run, I found myself at a park near our apartment. I sat down on a bench, watching as people walked by, couples holding hands, families playing with their kids, friends laughing together. It made me realize how much of life was still out there, waiting to be lived, even if it felt like my world had ended. There were still moments of joy, of connection, of hope. I just had to be willing to see them. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, fragile but real. I knew I still had a long way to go, and that the pain wouldn't just disappear overnight. But sitting there, in that park, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could start over. And maybe one day, I would be able to find happiness again. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, life began to settle into a new kind of normal. I had removed all traces of Vika from the apartment, redecorating, rearranging, and making it my own. It wasn't easy. Some days were still hard, the memories creeping back in when I least expected them. But each day, I found it got a little bit easier to keep moving forward. One Saturday, I decided to visit a local farmer's market. It was something Vika and I used to do together, but I hadn't been able to bring myself to go back until now. I walked through the stalls, the air filled with the scent of fresh produce, flowers, and baked goods. There was something comforting about it, the simple bustle of people, the bright colors of the fruits and vegetables, the friendly chatter of the vendors. As I was browsing a stall of freshly baked bread, I heard a voice next to me. "Hey, those look good, don't they?" I turned, and there was a woman standing beside me, smiling warmly. She had short, curly hair and kind eyes, and there was something about her smile that put me at ease. "Yeah, they do," I replied, returning her smile. "I can't decide which one to get." She laughed, a light, musical sound. "I know, right? They all look so good. I think I'm going with the sourdough, though. You can never go wrong with sourdough." I nodded, feeling an unexpected sense of warmth at the simple exchange. "Good choice. I think I'll do the same." We ended up chatting for a few minutes. Her name was Claire, and she lived a few blocks away. She was friendly and easy to talk to, and before I knew it, I found myself telling her about how I was trying to get back into cooking, and how I was hoping the bread would be the start of a nice dinner for myself. "That sounds great," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "Cooking for yourself can be really rewarding. I'm glad you're giving it a shot." There was something in the way she said it, a sincerity, an openness, that caught me off guard. I realized, standing there in the middle of the market, that I hadn't felt this kind of connection with anyone in a long time. It was simple and unforced, and it made me realize just how much I had isolated myself since everything with Vika had happened. Before we parted ways, Claire gave me her number, suggesting we meet up sometime for coffee or maybe a walk around the park. I took the slip of paper she handed me, staring at it for a moment before slipping it into my pocket. As I walked home, the loaf of bread tucked under my arm, I found myself smiling. It was a small step, just a chance encounter with a stranger. But it felt like a beginning, like maybe, despite everything that had happened, there was still hope for something new. Maybe it wasn't about forgetting the past, but about finding a way to live beyond it, to open myself up to whatever the future might bring. That evening, I made dinner for myself, using the sourdough as the base for a simple, comforting meal. I sat down at the kitchen table, the apartment quiet around me, and took a bite. It was good, better than I expected, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of contentment. I knew I wasn't completely healed, that the pain of Vika's betrayal still lingered. But I also knew that I was capable of finding moments of joy again, however small. And maybe, just maybe, those moments would grow into something more. Days passed since I met Claire, and something had shifted inside me. I found myself looking forward to simple things again, taking a walk in the morning, trying out new recipes, and going back to the farmer's market. It wasn't like everything was suddenly fixed, but it was as if a small light had been lit in a dark room, making the shadows seem less overwhelming. One evening, I sat on my balcony with a book in my hand. It was one of those evenings where the air was warm, and the sounds of the city around me felt comforting. I couldn't focus on the words, though. My thoughts kept drifting back to Claire, to her smile, to the way she had been so effortlessly kind. Eventually, I took out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found her name. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment, hesitation tightening in my chest. Part of me was scared of getting close to someone again, scared of being vulnerable. But I knew that if I didn't try, I'd end up closing myself off from the world, trapped in the hurt that Vika had left behind. Taking a deep breath, I tapped the screen and listened as the phone began to ring. It only rang twice before I heard Claire's voice, bright and warm on the other end. "Hello?" she said, and I could hear the faint noise of a TV in the background. "Hey, Claire," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's Rick. I was wondering if you'd still like to meet up for that coffee sometime." There was a pause, and then I heard her smile through the phone. "Of course, Rick. I was hoping you'd call. We made plans to meet at a small coffee shop near her apartment the following weekend, and when I hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief. I knew I was still carrying scars from what had happened, and I knew it wouldn't be easy to let someone in again. But Claire's warmth made me feel like maybe it was possible, that maybe I could start to heal. That weekend, I found myself standing outside the coffee shop, my heart pounding a little faster than usual. I could see Claire inside, sitting at a table by the window. Her hair catching the light from the late morning sun. She looked up, caught my eye, and waved, her smile as bright as I remembered. I smiled back and walked inside, feeling a mix of nerves and hope. As I sat down across from her, she leaned in slightly, her eyes meeting mine. "I'm really glad you called," she said, her voice sincere. "Me too," I replied, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. We talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily. Laughter mixing in with the stories we shared. Claire was open, honest, and unafraid to show her own vulnerabilities, and it made me feel like I could do the same. I told her about Vika, about the betrayal, the hurt, and the revenge that had left me feeling hollow. Claire listened without judgment, her gaze soft, her hand reaching out to touch mine briefly, offering silent support. By the time we left the coffee shop, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the streets. Claire walked beside me, her presence comforting in a way that made me feel like maybe things could be okay again. As we parted ways, she hugged me gently, her arms wrapping around me in a way that felt genuine and safe. And in that moment, I realized that I was beginning to let go of the pain that had once consumed me. I was beginning to open myself up to the possibility of something new, something real. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about finding a way to live beyond it. To find joy in the simple, beautiful moments that life still had to offer. Over the next few weeks, I saw Claire more often. We went on walks, had dinner together, and shared stories of our pasts, both the good and the bad. She never pushed me to open up more than I was ready for, and I appreciated that. She understood that I was still healing and that some wounds took time to fully mend. One evening, we decided to take a walk along the riverfront, the city lights reflecting off the water. It was a cool night, and Claire had brought a blanket, which she draped over our shoulders as we sat on a bench overlooking the river. We talked quietly, the gentle sound of the water lapping against the shore creating a peaceful backdrop. At one point, Claire turned to me, her expression thoughtful. Rick, do you think you've forgiven Vika? The question caught me off guard, and I looked out at the water, considering my answer. I had thought about forgiveness before, but it had always seemed impossible. How could I forgive someone who had hurt me so deeply, who had betrayed everything we had built together? But now, sitting here with Claire beside me, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about excusing what Vika had done. It was about letting go of the anger, the pain, and the bitterness that had kept me trapped in the past. It was about freeing myself from the burden of resentment so that I could move forward. I don't know if I've forgiven her, I said honestly, my gaze still on the water. But I think I'm ready to let go of the anger. I don't want it to define me anymore. Claire smiled gently, her eyes filled with understanding. She reached out, taking my hand in hers. That's a good start, Rick. Forgiveness doesn't have to be all at once. It can be a process, something that happens little by little. I squeezed her hand, feeling a warmth spread through me. Yeah, I think you're right. We sat there in silence for a while, the city lights shimmering around us. I felt a sense of calm, of peace, that I hadn't felt in a long time. The weight that had once pressed down on me felt lighter, and I knew that I was finally starting to let go of the past. It didn't mean that the pain was gone, or that I would forget what had happened. But it meant that I was ready to move beyond it, to create a new life for myself, one that wasn't defined by betrayal and revenge. As we stood to leave, Claire leaned in and kissed my cheek, her lips soft against my skin. You're stronger than you think, Rick, she whispered. I smiled, feeling the truth in her words. With Claire by my side, I knew that I had the strength to keep moving forward, to keep healing, and to keep finding moments of happiness, no matter how small. I had been through the storm, and now, as I walked away from the river with Claire's hand in mine, I realized that the future was still full of possibilities. Possibilities I was finally ready to embrace. A month later, I was sitting at my desk at work, going over some paperwork when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from an old friend, Josh, someone who had known both Vika and me since college. We hadn't talked much since the divorce, mostly because I had distanced myself from people who reminded me of the life I used to have. The message was simple: Hey, Rick. Just wanted you to know Vika reached out. She's in town and wants to meet. Thought you should hear it from me first. I stared at the message for a long moment, a mix of emotions rising inside me. I hadn't seen or spoken to Vika since the confrontation at the resort. The thought of seeing her again stirred something within me. A mix of anger, confusion, and something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I debated whether or not to respond, but eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I typed a quick reply: Thanks for letting me know, Josh. I'll think about it. The idea of seeing Vika again made my stomach twist, but I also knew that if I wanted to fully move on, I needed to face her. I needed to find closure, to let her know how her actions had affected me, and to finally leave the past behind. I talked to Claire about it that evening. We were sitting in my apartment, a half-empty bottle of wine on the table between us, the candles flickering softly. I hadn't told her much about my relationship with Vika, but I knew I needed her perspective. I got a message today, I said, my voice hesitant. From Josh. He said Vika's in town and wants to meet. Claire looked at me, her expression unreadable. She was silent for a moment before she nodded slowly. Do you think you're ready to see her? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to avoid it, but another part of me feels like I need to do it. To close that chapter of my life for good. Claire reached out, placing her hand on mine. If you think it will help you find peace, then I think you should do it. Just promise me you won't let her pull you back into the past. I squeezed her hand, grateful for her understanding. I won't, I promise. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a quiet cafe, waiting for Vika to arrive. I had chosen the place because it was neutral, somewhere that held no memories for us, somewhere I could meet her without feeling the weight of our past pressing down on me. When she walked in, I was surprised at how different she looked. Her hair was shorter, and she seemed smaller somehow, almost fragile. She spotted me, and her eyes widened slightly before she gave me a hesitant smile and walked over to my table. Hey, Rick, she said, her voice soft, almost unsure. Hey, Vika, I replied, nodding toward the seat across from me. Have a seat. She sat down, and for a moment, there was silence between us, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. I took a deep breath, deciding that if I was here, I might as well be honest. So, why did you want to see me? I asked, my voice steady. Vika looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. I wanted to apologize, Rick. I know it's too late. And I know I've hurt you in ways I can't ever take back. But I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realized that I needed to say I'm sorry. For everything. Her words hung in the air, and I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a flicker of something that felt like relief. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the regret in her eyes. It was genuine, and I could tell that she was hurting too, in her own way. I appreciate that, Vika, I said finally. But you need to understand that what you did, it broke me. It made me question everything about myself, about us, about what we had. And I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I know. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry and that I hope you can find happiness again. I let out a long breath, feeling the tension that had been building inside me begin to ease. I'm working on it, I said. I've met someone. Her name's Claire, and she's amazing. She's been helping me move on. Helping me see that there's still good in the world. Vika smiled a sad, wistful smile. I'm glad, Rick. You deserve to be happy. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could let go of the anger that had been eating away at me. I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive Vika, but I realized that I could let go of the resentment. I could move forward, leaving the past where it belonged. We talked for a little while longer, but there wasn't much left to say. When we finally stood to leave, Vika reached out, her hand hovering for a moment before she placed it on my arm. Take care of yourself, Rick, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You too, Vika, I replied, and with that, I turned and walked out of the cafe, the weight of the past finally beginning to lift. After my meeting with Vika, I felt an unexpected lightness, as if a burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't that all the pain had disappeared, there were still moments when the memories would sneak up on me, catching me off guard, but it was different now. The memories no longer had the power to hurt me the way they once had. I decided to focus more on my life with Claire, to truly invest in our relationship without the shadows of my past looming over us. She had been patient, understanding, and supportive, never pushing me but always there when I needed her. I knew I was lucky to have found someone like her, and I wanted to make sure she knew how much I appreciated her. One evening, I decided to surprise Claire. She had mentioned once how much she loved picnics, so I planned one for us at a park just outside the city. I spent the day gathering everything we would need: blankets, a wicker basket, her favorite snacks, and a bottle of wine. As the sun began to set, I picked her up from her apartment, her eyes lighting up with curiosity as I led her to the car. Where are we going? She asked, her smile playful. You'll see, I replied, keeping my voice teasingly mysterious. When we arrived at the park, the sky was painted with hues of pink and orange, the sun dipping below the horizon. I led Claire to a quiet spot under a large oak tree, the branches creating a canopy above us, and spread out the blanket. She laughed, her eyes wide with delight as she took it all in. Rick, this is amazing, she said, her voice filled with genuine happiness. I smiled, feeling the warmth spread through me at her reaction. I just wanted to do something special for you. You've been there for me through so much. And I wanted you to know how much that means to me. She looked at me, her eyes softening, and she reached out, cupping my face in her hands. You don't need to thank me, Rick. I care about you, and I'm just happy to be a part of your life. I leaned in, pressing my forehead against hers. You're more than just a part of my life, Claire. You're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time. We spent the evening talking, laughing, and enjoying each other's company. It felt different now, lighter, freer. I realized that for the first time since everything with Vika had happened, I was truly happy. It wasn't about pretending that the past didn't exist, but about realizing that it didn't define me. I had gone through pain, heartbreak, and betrayal, but I had also found love, hope, and a chance to start over. As the stars began to twinkle above us, Claire leaned her head on my shoulder, her fingers laced with mine. Do you ever think about what's next? She asked, her voice soft. I looked up at the sky, the endless expanse of stars stretching above us, and smiled. Yeah, I do. And for the first time, I feel like whatever comes next, I'm ready for it. As long as you're there with me. She looked up at me, her eyes shining. I'm not going anywhere, Rick. At that moment, I knew that I had finally let go of the past. I had faced it, acknowledged the pain, and moved beyond it. And now, as I sat there with Claire, I realized that I was ready for whatever the future held, for the ups, the downs, the moments of joy, and the challenges that would come our way. I was ready to truly live again, with Claire by my side, one day at a time. Claire and I began to settle into our own rhythm, a routine that felt natural and comforting. We weren't rushing anything, and that sense of ease made everything feel more real, more solid. We spent weekends exploring new places in the city, cooking dinners together in my small kitchen, and even tackling mundane tasks like grocery shopping. Somehow, even the smallest moments felt special when she was around. One Saturday afternoon, Claire and I decided to try something a little different. We signed up for a pottery class at a studio downtown. It was something we both had never done before, and the idea of trying something new together was exciting. The studio had a cozy feel to it, with shelves lined with finished ceramic pieces, the air filled with a mixture of clay and hope. As we sat at our pottery wheels, I couldn't help but notice the way Claire's face lit up as she got her hands covered in clay. She had this way of diving headfirst into new experiences, unafraid of making mistakes, and her enthusiasm was infectious. I found myself smiling as I watched her, my own hands covered in a mess of wet clay that barely resembled a vase. Claire looked over at me, her hands guiding the clay expertly on her wheel. "How's it going over there?" she asked with a grin. I glanced down at my creation, which was lopsided and on the verge of collapsing. "Well, I think it's more of a modern art piece than anything," I joked. She laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I think it looks great. Besides, pottery is all about embracing imperfections, right?" I looked back at my work, her words resonating with me in a way that went beyond just the clay in front of me. "Yeah," I said softly, my gaze shifting to her. "I guess it is." The class was full of laughter and lighthearted frustration as we tried to mold our clay into something vaguely recognizable. By the end of it, Claire had managed to create a small bowl that was charmingly imperfect, while my piece looked like something out of a surrealist dream. Still, we both loved what we had made, not because they were perfect, but because we had created them together. That evening, we took our creations home, setting them on the windowsill to dry. As we stood there, looking at our wonky pieces of pottery, Claire leaned her head against my shoulder, her arm wrapping around my waist. "You know, I've never felt this comfortable with anyone before," she said quietly. "It feels like I can just be myself with you, flaws and all." I turned to look at her, my heart swelling with emotion. "I feel the same way, Claire. You make me feel like I don't have to pretend, like I can just be who I am. And I love that. She smiled, her eyes meeting mine, and at that moment, I realized just how much I loved her. It wasn't just the big moments, the romantic gestures, or the adventures we shared. It was the quiet, everyday moments, the way she laughed, the way she looked at me, the way she made me feel like I could be myself without fear. It was in the way she embraced my past without judgment, helping me heal without trying to fix me, and in the way she allowed me to do the same for her. Claire had become not just a part of my life, but the person I wanted to build a future with. And I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together, one imperfect, beautiful moment at a time. As the months passed, my relationship with Claire only grew stronger. We had settled into a routine, but it was anything but mundane. Every day brought new joys, new challenges, and new reasons for me to fall deeper in love with her. We had talked about the future a few times, casually mentioning the idea of moving in together, but we hadn't made any concrete plans. One night, we were sitting on my couch, the lights dimmed, a movie playing in the background. Claire was curled up next to me, her head resting on my shoulder, her hand intertwined with mine. I found myself glancing around my apartment, thinking about how much it had changed since she had come into my life. It felt warmer, more like a home, and I realized that it was because of her presence. I looked down at Claire, my heart pounding as a thought formed in my mind, one that had been lingering for a while now. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Claire," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at me, her eyes soft and filled with affection. "Yeah? I've been thinking a lot lately," I began, my voice a little shaky. "About us. About the future." She sat up slightly, her gaze focused on me, curiosity in her eyes. "What about it?" she asked, her tone gentle. I took another deep breath, feeling the words catch in my throat. "I want us to be together, Claire. I mean, really together. I want you to move in with me. I want to build a life with you." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, there was silence between us. My heart raced, a mix of hope and fear coursing through me. And then, slowly, her lips curved into a smile, her eyes shining with emotion. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my hand tightening around hers. "Completely. I love you, Claire. I want to share my life with you, all of it. The good, the bad, and everything in between." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached up, cupping my face in her hands. "I love you too, Rick," she said, her voice trembling. "And I would love to move in with you. I want that more than anything." Relief washed over me, and I pulled her into my arms, holding her close. It felt like everything had finally fallen into place, like all the pain, heartbreak, and struggle had led me to this moment, to this person who made everything feel right. The following weeks were a whirlwind of packing, moving boxes, and rearranging furniture. It was hectic and exhausting, but it was also one of the happiest times of my life. Claire moved in, bringing with her a sense of warmth and comfort that transformed my apartment into a true home. We spent our days unpacking, laughing at the chaos, and planning how we wanted our space to look. One night, after a long day of unpacking, we found ourselves sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by half-opened boxes and mismatched furniture. The room was a mess. But it didn't matter. Claire looked over at me, her eyes tired but happy, and smiled. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with contentment. I smiled back, reaching out to take her hand. "Yeah, we did." We sat there for a moment, the silence between us comfortable, the weight of the day fading away. I looked around the room, at the boxes, the scattered belongings, and then back at Claire. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And that was all that mattered. "Do you ever think about where we'll be in a year?" Claire asked suddenly, her voice thoughtful. I looked at her, a smile tugging at my lips. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I know that wherever we are, we'll be together. And that's enough for me." She leaned in, pressing her lips to mine, and I kissed her back, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. I had been through so much, betrayal, heartbreak, and the struggle to find myself again. But now, with Claire by my side, I knew that I had found something real, something worth holding on to. We had taken a leap of faith. And I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together, hand in hand, ready for whatever came our way. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, completely happy. The evening of the party arrived quicker than I anticipated. We had spent the last few days planning every detail, what I would say, how I would present it, and how I would make sure that Vika and Daniel both had no idea what was coming. As the guests began arriving at the poolside of the resort, the air was filled with a mix of excitement and anticipation. The sound of chatter blending with the tropical music playing in the background. I stood by the bar, a glass of rum in my hand, trying to mask the turmoil inside. This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. The perfect revenge. I scanned the crowd until I saw Vika, wearing a bright smile and a flowing sundress, talking animatedly to some guests. She seemed so carefree, so unaware of what I had in store. Next to her was Daniel, his arm casually brushing against hers as they laughed together. Seeing them standing there, looking so comfortable with each other, was a final confirmation of everything that had gone wrong. But I wasn't sad anymore. I was done feeling hurt. All I felt was the determination to make things right for myself. As the crowd settled, I stepped up to the microphone near the poolside stage. The music faded, and the guests turned their attention to me. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to smile, a smile that masked everything brewing underneath. "Good evening, everyone," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thank you all for being here tonight. I've got something very special to share, and I hope you'll all bear with me for a moment." I saw Vika glance at me, her expression shifting from confusion to something else, a flicker of unease. I kept my eyes on her as I continued. "You know, vacations are all about making memories, right? About sharing moments with those we care about. And sometimes we capture those memories to look back on, to see them for what they are." I gestured to a staff member standing nearby, who nodded and activated the projector I had set up earlier. The poolside wall, white and smooth, suddenly filled with an image, the start of a slideshow. At first, the photos were innocent enough. Pictures of our early days at the resort, Vika and me at dinner, sunsets over the water. I heard murmurs of appreciation from the guests. But then, the images changed. Suddenly, there were photos of Vika, but not with me, photos of her laughing with Daniel at the bar. Her hand resting on his arm, the two of them looking far more intimate than friends would. A few people gasped, their eyes darting from the projection to Vika, who had gone pale. I continued speaking, my voice calm despite the chaos building in the air. It's interesting how, sometimes, the memories we capture aren't always what we think they are. Sometimes, they show the truth in ways words can't. The final image appeared, Vika and Daniel, sitting close together on the beach at night. Her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. I let the silence stretch, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on her. Vika's expression crumbled. "Rick, what are you doing?" she managed, her voice barely audible. I stepped away from the microphone, looking directly at her. "Showing everyone the truth, Vika. The truth about you, and about us." The murmurs of the crowd grew louder, people whispering to one another, their expressions ranging from shock to pity. Daniel, standing beside her, looked like he wanted to disappear, his face flushed red. I didn't stay to hear their excuses or their attempts at damage control. I had done what I came to do. I set my glass down and walked away from the pool, the murmurs fading behind me. The weight I'd carried for days seemed to lift as I stepped away from the scene, leaving Vika and Daniel to deal with the aftermath. This was my line in the sand, my way of taking back control. As I walked away from the chaos I had unleashed, I felt, for the first time in a long while, a sense of peace begins to settle over me. The party was over, and so was the life I had with Vika. I walked away from that scene, from the gasps and whispers, from the look on her face that showed a mixture of guilt, shock, and despair. As I left the poolside and made my way to the quiet part of the resort, the weight of everything started to truly settle in. I had done it. I had pulled off my plan, and Vika and Daniel were exposed for who they really were. I found myself by the shoreline, the gentle waves lapping at the sand, moonlight reflecting off the water. The beach was empty, and for the first time, I could hear my own thoughts clearly. The initial rush of satisfaction I'd felt was starting to fade, replaced by something deeper, something less certain. I sat down in the sand, watching the waves and letting the cool breeze wash over me. What had I really won? I had taken my revenge and made them both feel the sting of betrayal as I had felt it. But now that it was over, I couldn't shake the emptiness that lingered. Vika's betrayal had cut deep, and my revenge was supposed to be my way of taking back control, of healing from that wound. But sitting there alone, I realized that revenge hadn't brought me peace. It had only brought closure to one chapter. I knew I couldn't stay in this place much longer. I had already booked a flight back home for the next day, and it was time to leave all of this behind me. I needed a fresh start. Away from the resort, away from the memories that now felt tainted. I needed to focus on myself, to find my own happiness without looking back. The next morning, I packed my things and checked out of the resort. I didn't look for Vika, and I didn't care to see what state she or Daniel were in. It wasn't my concern anymore. I was done with all of it, and the only thing that mattered now was what came next. The plane ride home felt like a transition, like I was leaving behind not just a place, but a part of myself that had been consumed by anger and hurt. I leaned back in my seat, staring out at the clouds as they drifted past, and allowed myself to let go. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't know exactly what my future would look like, but I knew it wouldn't be defined by what Vika had done to me. Back home, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my work, taking on new projects and challenges that kept me busy and fulfilled. I reconnected with old friends. People I'd drifted away from while I was too focused on my relationship with Vika. I started going to the gym regularly and taking better care of myself, and it felt good. It felt like I was reclaiming my own sense of worth and purpose. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the memories crept back in, when the sting of betrayal felt fresh all over again. But those moments grew fewer and further between as time went on. I realized that what I truly needed wasn't revenge or validation. It was to find my own strength. To remember who I was before all of this had happened. One evening, a few months later, I found myself sitting at a small cafe, sipping on a cup of coffee as I read a book. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything, and for the first time in a long time, I felt content. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I had found a sense of peace within myself, a quiet understanding that life would move forward, that I would move forward. As I looked around at the people passing by, the laughter and conversation that filled the air, I knew that I was ready for whatever came next. I had faced the betrayal, I had faced my own darkness, and I had come out the other side stronger for it. The chapter with Vika was closed, and a new one was just beginning. One where I could be truly happy, not because of anyone else, but because I had found that happiness within myself. I smiled, taking another sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through me. The past was behind me, and the future was wide open. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace it.